Thank you all so much for being here. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kendra Barnett and I'm Adweek's senior tech reporter. I assume if you are in this room, you know either one or both of these lovely panelists here, but I will introduce them anyways. Obviously, Andrew Casale, president and CEO of Index Exchange, and Shane Shevlin, which I hope is the right way to pronounce your name.
It is indeed.
Co-founder and CEO of Bedrock Platform, and we're here to discuss Index's new update, which is going to be very exciting, and how Bedrock is working with Index and what this means for the industry writ large. So, programmatic has historically operated at a distance where the impression is far away from all of the logic and decisioning associated with that impression.
Yeah.
And with that, as all of you probably know, comes cost, latency, and signal loss. And it's also helped to concentrate power with a select few players in this industry who need not be named. But what we're talking about today is this structural shift, moving decisioning closer to that point of transaction through a containerized infrastructure that Index has been working on for quite a long time, that lets buy-side logic operate within the exchange itself. And the promise, what I am told, is that this will be more efficient and create also a more competitive ecosystem where DSPs can ideally compete on their merits, their intelligence, outcomes, all of that, not just scale and infrastructure. So lots and lots to unpack there.
Yes.
The biggest question I have is that we're going to get into is, does this markedly change how the market works, or is it an incremental shift in the paradigm that we have right now? We're going to get into all that. That was a lot. I need to stop talking and let you guys talk. But Andrew, I want to start with you.
Absolutely.
I want to know what's broken and why now?
Yes. Well, thank you again. And that's a great frame. Frankly, there's a lot broken, but the simplest stat to point to is just the growth of the open internet at large. If you've ever seen one of these charts of just digital advertising spend, it's a triangle that's going up and to the right. But then there's this line, it's the ceiling, which is the addressable universe that we and most of the internet lives in. It's almost like we grow into a ceiling, and then the rest of the growth goes to 3 or 4 companies: Google, Meta, Amazon. And when you speak to marketers who assign disproportionate amounts of their budget to those companies, they don't do it because they love Google or Meta. They might have great reps there, but they do it because they perform. They do it because they drive outcomes. They do it because they sell product. I think that's what's broken. And I think part of the ecosystem that we operate within has all these historical constraints that have frankly led to a lot of ad tech getting in the way. They've also created a lot of costs that kind of get buried under the scenes, but it all comes at the expense of performance. It all harms outcomes, and it all leads to the internet kind of growing into a ceiling. I think that's what's fundamentally broken right now.
And what can you just draw out some of the specific elements that have made this more urgent right now? Is it cost pressure? Is it AI? What other elements are at play here?
Look at the health of the customer. For us, we are a sell-side company, so our customer is the media company. We started on the web. We have just about every major media company in the world as a customer to Index. We work in app. We work in streaming. There aren't a lot of publishers who are high-fiving right now at the health of digital advertising, about the amount of media spend that's coming to their business, about their ability to fund content. That's to me, the warning sign that something has to give. On the other hand, there's a small number of companies that keep printing billions. And we all effectively feed from the same trough, because despite the fact that, Google has Waymo and a few other bets, the vast majority of Google's revenue is advertising. Almost all of Meta's revenue is advertising. And they are just disproportionately outperforming everybody else. And so I think the health of the publisher is really the dire warning, coupled with this ecosystem now that we're operating within, where the web is challenged. We have Gemini and overviews swallowing traffic on the web, so it's creating even more challenges for publishers. And I think it's even more important that we do something about this, or the future for publishing is quite concerning.
Yeah, for somebody who works at one of those publishing
Right,
companies, I really feel that. So Shane, I want to turn to you. By bringing Bedrock Bidder into Index Cloud, what concretely changes for the buyer?
So I think to answer that question, Kendra, like I'll continue with the theme that you've raised, Andrew, which is performance. If we just think of what we're doing in simple performance terms, if you collapse the distance between our decision layer, which is what we need to perform well, and the impression, the only game in town becomes decisioning, right? So you're not dealing with 15 hops cross network with latency thrown in and a per request for an impression real world cost, because we live effectively in the same data center, but not just in the same data center, using the same compute. We don't have to serialize requests. We just focus on how do we make the best decision for the best performance.
So I feel like, this conversation is happening within this larger context. I feel like I'm Kamala Harris doing the memes. I'm the coconut tree. I don't know why, but like we've heard for years about the idea that like decisioning should move closer to the impression. My question, which might be a dumb question, is like, why hasn't that happened before?
Yeah.
And what is making this viable now? And that's like open for either or both of you.
I'll start it and then feel free to chime in. Part of it was like when we built this market, if you go back 15 years ago, when programmatic started or RTV started, everyone was high-fiving themselves because in 200 to 300 milliseconds, which was a blink of an eye, we could run an auction. And back then it was a technical marvel. It was absolutely inconceivable that you could have platforms speaking to each other in sub-second timeframes and doing these auctions. The thing is, 15 years has advanced and 200 milliseconds is no longer impressive. It's actually quite slow. Computing technologies have advanced, but the market itself was still largely modeled the old way. So I'd say at the beginning of all this, we couldn't have done this, but now we can. And we're now leveraging that to solve real structural problems. The other structural problem is the internet is big and keeps getting bigger. It is so enormous. Even in this world where Gemini and overviews are reducing traffic to some publishers on the web is still in growth. App is in massive growth still. Streaming is exploding. So if you look at the sum total of the internet, every year it keeps getting bigger. But the reality is the more growth that happens in scale on the internet, the more cost is created. And that's become another challenge. So 10 years ago, the internet was small enough that a DSP could listen to the whole internet. But today, the internet is so big, DSPs have to throttle it because the cost of computing the internet has become cost prohibitive. So that's the other dynamic at play that just wasn't there at the beginning, but is there now, which is why we're trying to solve this problem in a new way. And feel free to...
Yeah. So like QPS gaps effectively go away, Kendra. And that's important potentially for the open market, but for us, like one of the reasons I founded this business was to make deals work better. Why? Because it was pretty obvious to me at the turn of, I guess we got Google to thank actually in some respects with the deprecation of the cookie, where deals became a kind of safe mechanism to trade across a trusted currency, whatever that currency was for the publisher. And so for us, like one of our kind of cornerstones as a business is make deals work better. And so, on that basis, like it's pretty important that we get to see all of the available traffic inside of a deal. If our customer says to us, we've agreed to set price with a publisher, we understand that the data that we need, which is surfaced on the supply side, first-party data at the publisher level, one of their partners, whatever the use case is, that deal is extremely valuable to our buyer customer, our media buyer. And so this partnership is a step change for us in terms of being able to get visibility of that traffic within that trusted currency and buy it at the most competitive price.
We're kind of touching on these like kind of technical constraints and the shape of the system, but Shane, in practice, how portable is a DSP's model intelligence?
You mean like the models that we use? So like in terms of how we operate the external instance of our bidder, the original instance, nothing's really changing. So what's great about containerization, it's not a new concept, it's been around for a long time. is that the image that we have deployed inside Index's data center is cryptographically signed. It is not the code of our application is not visible to Index, so we retain full independence of how we actually decision on an ad. We run our models in the same way as we always have done, whether that's price reduction, whether it's based on data to set a new bid price based on a signal that is unique to us, that is coming into us that Index is not seeing. So nothing changes. Even the front end is exactly the same. So our customers, unless we told them, would not realize that they're running on the Index instance compared to the current instance externally. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. Andrew, so with the development of Index Cloud, you're ideally removing a huge chunk of infrastructure cost. Where do you anticipate that those savings will end up? And do buyers see lower take rates? Will DSPs have bigger margins? What does that look like?
What I really hope, like the first thing I'll say is like the overriding focus for Index is to support publishers. And so if all this manifests into nothing more than DSPs growing their margins and nothing more to getting to working media, this doesn't even benefit Index because our fee model happens at the end of the transaction. And so our bet is that this is going to promote more working media into the channel. The most exciting and realistic win that we're already seeing, and we already see with the Bedrock Bidder, is QPS caps, which historically have led to just choking the amount of supply that goes to a DSP, open up dramatically. And what does that mean? It means more of our customer supply becomes addressable to the bidder and addressable to the buy. It also means that campaign that was targeting a really scarce audience that could only scale to maybe 25% of the budget on the open internet that needed the walled gardens to scale the other 75% can now scale its buy to 100% because the open internet is actually appearing larger now than it was before in the throttled state. And so the end hope that I believe that this will create is a more competitive internet, an internet where bidders have more ubiquitous access to supply, buys scale better, and buyers start scaling the internet, buyers start saying the internet's bigger than they thought and it performs better than they thought. There's an alternative version of reality where a DSP might keep margin, but then my response to that would be, in a world where bidders are more competitive, this is a very competitive market. And so I think competitive dynamics will also prevent a DSP from just sort of like hoarding a new cost savings. And I think many of them will look at this as an opportunity to actually scale their buys. But what's your take? I'd be curious to hear from you.
I mean, the cost reduction argument is strong, and we will be passing savings on to our clients. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But what is exciting for me in this kind of step change in how we actually buy is the accessibility of data on the supply side. So sell-side decisioning around data, which historically has not really lived inside DSPs. And when it does, it's kind of overly prescriptive in terms of how it's usable. And so, some data is great for good performance, more data is better. And, that extra data will come from, trusted publishers. It will mean better quality and it will mean better performance.
Mm-hmm. I want to push a little bit, Andrew, on the idea that like greater visibility into the available inventory will necessarily benefit the end buyer, just because I want to contextualize this within the context of which we have all come from. It's like we've seen these kind of step changes in programmatic before, like the advent of header bidding and this recent boom of SPO that has like really increased transparency in some ways. And I think that maybe some of the narrative at the time with those kinds of things are like, oh, it's going to lead to the buyer is going to benefit at the end of the day. But like transparency doesn't always equate to, those savings. So I guess like what is meaningfully different about this?
Well, I think it comes back to that scarce example that I mentioned, because this happens on a daily basis. Like we see it, I don't know the count of deal IDs today on Index, but it's in the tens of thousands. And there's a cohort of deal IDs that never scales to the potential of the budget assigned to them. And more often than not, when we do advanced troubleshooting and we have ops teams that go really deep with analysts, QPS limitations on the DSP are a big driver. And so I do believe quite strongly that when we don't have that as a constraint, budget will scale more freely. That has nothing to do directly with the business model of the DSP, but it has a lot to do with the benefit publishers will see from the channel. Because gross media spend going up is very good for business. The business model dynamics of a DSP, I think, get worked out between the competitive dynamics between DSPs, which we don't really take a direct position in. I do think a lot of buyers increasingly are auditing the way DSPs operate. They're increasingly using supply side logs and DSP logs to try to figure out where fees are going. And that's going to naturally continue to advance and I think address that particular concern. But I don't think that's what really drives the value in the unlock. I think the unlock is way more supply being accessible at a much lower compute cost so that DSPs can more universally buy the open internet and instead of seeing a constrained version of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Shane, if infrastructure is no longer a bottleneck, what do you think becomes the real competitive edge for DSPs generally? And does it mean that, does it genuinely open the door for smaller players, or does it just change like how the incumbents operate?
It does. So it levels the playing field to a large extent. So, no longer do we need to compete on scale. Like QPS caps are gone. So if we want, we can listen to the entire global bit stream. Like that's not our strategy. We're focused on buyers who are leveraging sell-side decisioning, as I mentioned. But if you think about like the proximity angle, so if we're typically waiting, let's say 60 milliseconds, 80 milliseconds before we can even get to make the decision or like assess the bid, if that drops to like sub 5 milliseconds or even lower, like what are we going to do with that additional like leftover latency? We'll give it to somebody who's got big ambition with a fatter model looking to evaluate all the variables in a bid request rather than just 4 or 5.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think those bigger DSPs are going to be thinking right now about all this?
Great question. I mean, I think they will sit up and take note because, like I said, they need to compete with us on the data and the approach and the decisioning rather than scale.
Yeah.
I'll also say, because it's day one if possible, and I've already had a ton of conversation with DSPs. I think a lot of DSPs are going to follow the path and containerize their bidder because there are no prizes for your number 2 line item in your OpEx being the amount of money you pay to the public cloud. And if you can reduce that dramatically, that is capital that you've freed up to make other investments in. I don't think this is something that over time will create advantages. I think it's actually just going to remove advantages that today are temporary because there is a huge cost to listening to a lot of scale that shouldn't be there, that should never have been there, that we're going to remove. There's a quote from one of your engineers, I hope you don't mind me sharing it, but it was like a pretty profound one that I heard. We hosted an event last week after announcing this as well. And one of your engineers came up to me and said, and this is somebody who's been building DSPs and bidders for literally over a decade. So he kind of has done this a lot. But he said after the first bid request was received by the container, it placed its bid and won its first impression, they kind of like stepped back and asked themselves why they ever built DSPs the old way. And that's the kind of, I think, next level dynamic that this is going to bring. Like this is a new tomorrow. And now any DSP that's receiving bid requests in the public cloud and paying this huge invisible tax, they're inefficient. There's no need to do that anymore. This is so much better. And then I hope over time this will make the internet more performant.
Mm-hmm. Are there particular channels or environments in which this will be especially valuable for Bedrock?
All channels, Kendra, but the one that I think we're most excited about is live streaming environments where you've got a ton of additional problems beyond the kind of, bid request round trip, latency, drop bids, traffic shaping, and that is concurrent users and just unpredictability of the ad slot for a live event, right? So if you're in the data center where the decision is finally made to run the ad slot and you've got a ton of opportunity and demand that you need to present at that moment, then we're really well positioned to fill that gap.
Great. So Andrew, I want to talk a little bit more before we wrap up about the walled gardens. You've obviously positioned this move as a way to help the open internet compete. What specific performance gaps are you trying to close, and what actually has to improve? Signal outcomes, what?
I want to get to a place where the open internet is known for driving outcomes at scale, the same way PMax is known, the same way Advantage Plus is known, or Performance Max is known. And I think that we're going to be able to pull this off. It's not going to be just this iteration, but it's the next couple of steps. I think Shane was getting into it before. We've already seen phenomenal performance coming through what we call the hot path, or sort of this pre-bid request moment where we can have models make decisions. The custom bidding algo companies, the Chalices of the world. I think I see the Empowered guys here, or Sybids, or this is a great growing category of companies that are doing this, and they're already driving performance that's outperforming just the base algorithm of the DSP. But a lot of them have a race, and the race is in 5 to 10 milliseconds, the model has to make a decision. And it's incredible to see what they can do in such a short amount of time. The reason for the race is bidders take a lot more time. Bidders take 200 milliseconds. In a world where the bidder is faster, the model can be slower. In a world where the model is slower, the model can be bigger. And when the model's bigger and has more features, you start to get to a paradigm that looks a little bit more like Facebook and Google. One of the reasons why they're so performant is their models are enormous.
Yeah.
They have massive GPUs that are training these models. I think Facebook has 10,000 GPUs that train their models. Incredible number of features that they have, and they're not super, instantaneous in their think time. But if we give these models 50 milliseconds or 100 milliseconds, I think we're going to be able to drive a level of performance on the open internet that no one's ever seen before. And so that's never been possible and is soon going to be possible. And that's what motivates me to bring the fight to the walled gardens. This is not about chipping off a few points of share with SSPs here or here and growing into that ceiling. This is about growing the pie. Like that's the long vision and the long bet here.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a very big vision, and I'm hopeful for you. What are the biggest reasons this might not work or might not scale? And for buyers in the room right now, what should they or would they be skeptical of?
Honestly, everything that I'm seeing suggests that we are getting the requisite buy-in that historically has held these ideas back. Usually, the reason why ideas don't root is we don't have buyers interested, we don't have people calling and testing new novel ideas. The status quo is paramount. Everyone does things the old way, and for whatever reason, there's like change in the air. I'm seeing a level of engagement and buy-in and testing that I've never seen before, even since last week's press. Like, you tell me we're not the DSP,
yeah.
But there's a lot of people calling right now. And that's a huge ingredient because, to be perfectly frank, over the last decade, programmatic has really been defined strategically as consolidate more share to 2 DSPs. That's been the overriding strategy. And while they're both our partners, there's some changes happening now where people are trying new techniques. They're embracing portability of models. And that's the key ingredient. And then that testing iteration is going to be a flywheel that we're going to use to innovate over and over and over again. And we will bring the fight to the walled gardens. I am quite confident.
So I'm hearing there's nothing holding you back. Okay.
I'm seeing all the right signs.
Okay, amazing.
Fact check me in a year. We'll see.
Well, on that note about projections, we're going to wrap up with a little projection. Last question for both of you, kind of a rapid fire. Look ahead 5 years. If this model takes root and succeeds, what is fundamentally different about programmatic?
Do you want to start that? I'm happy to.
I mean, so like we're a couple of weeks in and we're already safely testing it. 100,000 QPS, next stop 500,000 QPS. So at that kind of scale, that quickly, there's no limit, there's no ceiling to how well we can perform at scale. So yeah, I'm super excited. What was your time frame again, Kendra?
5 years.
5 years. Wow.
What do you think? I'm not going to let you off with that. That was good. It's good to hear about what you're seeing right now, but
Be bold.
I think, yeah, I mean, videos eating the internet, live streaming, live event streaming, and the types of opportunities. So I was at the main conference hall today, and there was a section about the Tubi ad at the Super Bowl, which it was just like, what a story, And if we can have more of that for live events, I think, and power that would make me proud.
cool. Andrew?
I'll throw out 2. One is like this little thing. I love it. The phone is incredible, but it's quite small. I wish there was a TV in the room, but like the TV is much bigger. If we can make the TV, which is much bigger, perform as well as this little thing, we will change the way this market and big tech operates fundamentally, and we have the potential to do that. We have the bigger screen, we have the playground, and we now have a lot of the tools that historically have only been afforded to the phone companies. Mm-hmm. That's like the first big bold prediction. The second is, I think, short of maybe less than 5 bidders, every bidder in 5 years will be containerized. Because as I said, there will be no prizes for paying more of your OpEx to the public cloud. I think they will become a faint memory, and it'll no longer be normal to stand up a bidder in the public cloud in 5 years.
Okay. All right, I like it. I like it. Very big and bold.